My name is Raquel Burns, and I am from Colonial Intermediate Unit 20. I've been there for just about 7 to 8 years now, and I'm part of the TAC department for training and consultation. And my main initiative area is LEEI, which is Learning Environment and Engagement Initiative, which used to be the behavior, initiative. So I work with our school districts across the different regions that we support, and I help them with their Tier 1, Tier 2, and their Tier 3 for behavior support and under the MTSS umbrella. So I'm supporting school-wide positive behavior support, check-in, check-out, check-in connect, renew, and other classroom management support and or in-classroom consultation and observations. And my colleague here, Jen, and I have been collaborating for about 7 years now since I actually started, and she's going to introduce herself as well.
Hi, my name is Jen Fuller. I work for the East Stroudsburg Area School District. I am going on my 18th year. In those 18 years, I have served in a variety of different roles, a behavior analyst, middle school assistant principal, a dean of students, and a special ed teacher teaching at the elementary and secondary level. Throughout my 18 years, a lot of my work has been into our MTSS programming at our school district, our initiatives of SEL, as well as PBIS.
So the reason why, I guess before we start, if you do have any questions throughout our presentation, please feel free to raise your hand and you'll receive a mic. I'll repeat, or Jen will repeat the question that you have as we go out throughout today's session. If you want to ask at the end, we will try and leave time, even given the fact that we have started a little bit later, okay? So what we wanted to present to you today was really looking at school-wide positive behavior support within the school setting, but strengthening Tier 1 in the classroom setting. And the reason why, okay, we're gonna forget the clicker. The reason why that we wanted to discuss the classroom setting is because that is the primary spot where all our kids are all day long, right? And that's the spot where we have the most variation. So we have a lot of variation because we have different teachers, we have all our kids, we have different lessons going on throughout the day, and we have a structure framework, right, in place with our MTSS and our school-wide positive behavior support. But how do we keep that consistent as possible with having our own techniques, right, and our own teaching and our own approaches with our students and being able to keep it individualized, but keep those core foundations in the core of our teaching. So we're going to be talking to you today about just an overview of school-wide positive behavior support in Tier 1, looking at how we combined SEL within that framework, talking about classroom management through focusing on expectations within lesson plans. So, and we're going to be talking about this within the East Stroudsburg Area School District with one of the schools, but then also elaborating more on some additional ideas based off of research and collaboration between Jen and I to give you more ideas that you can bring back into your schools as well. So to start off, we're going to be looking at the pyramid that we typically see, right, all the time. So we're looking at MTSS. And we see that we have 3 different tiers. And you see your percentages here, right? So it's telling us that when we're looking at our Tier 1, our universal levels of support should target at least 80% of our students before we look at different supports and interventions that our students may need. We also see that our tier looks at academics and behavior. And even though that they're independently on one side or another, what we want to stress is that they are interrelated, right? So academics go hand in hand with behavior, and behavior goes hand in hand with academics, right? So depending on how we are receiving our instruction and our students are receiving our instruction, it directly impacts behavior and vice versa. So one of the things that we wanted to really point out is that you may see this image when we talk about school-wide positive behavior support within our MTSS structure. And we were able to find one that actually related to farming. So I'm going to be able to give you real life examples and then related to within the school setting, right? So we see that we want an outcome, right? And our outcome is that we want produce, right? That is good to sell, good for us to eat, not that we're like weeding through produce that is not fresh and not good for our families like when we're at home, right? So as a farmer or as an educator, we need to sit back and we need to really look at the data. What is our baseline? What are we starting off with? How is the field? What do we need to do to prep it, right? What do we need to do to groom it in order to get what we want to see? We're looking at past things that we've done in the past. How has it worked? How did it not work? And where do we want to go from there? And then we're also looking at our current situations, the variables that we don't know. How much rain did we have this year, right? Or how much rain did we not have this year? And how fertile is this soil? You know, what else do I need to bring inside to make this the best environment, right? The best area for what I'm looking for. So we look at then our practices. Right? Am I going to bring in fertilizer? Am I seeing a lot of weeds that I need to bring in, you know, a different thing to take those, you know, those weeds out? When we're looking in our classroom setting, what instructional practices am I implementing? What am I using for my students so that they gain that access to the information that I'm trying to give them? How am I increasing instructional time due to some behaviors that we may be seeing in the classroom setting? And then we look at our systems, right? So within our systems, we're looking at who are the experts. We're looking at the farmer. We're looking at the educator. We're trying to then take their knowledge and expertise, but then we're also trying to educate those around us at the same time, right? So we're trying to increase our own knowledge and expertise, and then we're also trying to collaborate with those around us to be able to say, well, what kind of training do we need? What other information do we need to gain? What are you trying out maybe down the block where I see your produce is growing really well and you're getting those great peach trees and, you know, different things that are going on? And what can I do in my classroom setting too in order to have similar outcomes? It's not always going to be the same, right? Because we still have variables that are different. Myself as an educator, the students that I have in my classroom need different things than Gen students need, right? So we know that there's always constant variables that are changing and we have to take into effect, but we need to make sure that we have that strong foundational system. And when we talk about Tier 1 and we talk about school-wide, there are basic core components, right, that when you're working with a PBIS facilitator, like myself at the IU, or within your collaborating IUs, a lot of my colleagues that I have yearly, you know, quarterly meetings with, how are we taking that structure of being able to start school-wide in your building, but now also enhance it at that classroom level where we have your whole building, let's say we're all from the same school, right, where we can infuse that within each one of your classroom settings. So one of the things that we want to stress and point out is that we also have a student profile. So when we're talking about outcomes and we're talking about wanting students to have, you know, increased academic outcomes, decreased behavioral, you know, concerns in the classroom, we don't want to label the students. It's not that a student's Tier 1 or a student is in the red tier or that we're saying he's on Tier 2, right? We're looking at tiers to help support students. So Raquel needs Tier 2 support with problem solving, right? So you could see that I can be needing different supports for different things depending on what that is, whether it's academics or behavior. It's the same thing and goes hand in hand here. What we want to say, though, is that while we recognize that I may need more supports for attendance, where you're seeing that in the Tier 3, what can we still do within Tier 1 levels of supports in order to help with some of those maybe academic challenges that I might have, or maybe some of those behavioral concerns that are happening in the classroom? And there's a lot of different things that you can do is the answer to that. The focus of what Jen and I are going to be discussing today is really honing in on your school-wide expectations, utilizing them with your SEL components that you may or may not have, necessarily going on in the classroom, and infusing that within our daily lesson plans so that we are talking the same language, right? When we're talking about what are your 3 to 5 school-wide expectations, when you're talking about how to do fractions, right? So we're hearing the same thing from our larger systems into our smaller groups that we're doing with our kids. So one of the things that is a really important part of my job that I do when I come in is that we look at readiness for Tier 1, right? Schools that are here today that are receiving recognition in Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 is because we're coming out and we're doing fidelity assessments. So we're doing the TFI, which is the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. And understanding the components of these is really helpful because as a team, you're looking at and evaluating where you are with different components. What are the needs that you may have or the outcomes that you currently have going on? Thinking back to the practices, the supports, and the data, right? You're looking at those within school-wide and you're evaluating. So how does that relate to what we're talking about today? You're gonna see here that we extracted just from the Tier 1 TFI, which are the components that we're really targeting today. So those behavioral expectations. Does your school have those 3 to 5 expectations? And that's what this is looking at, right? And having that matrix. But now how do we take that matrix and make sure it is prevalent in the classroom setting and that we are having that language so the kids hear that when they're getting those tickets, or those points, or whatever you're using to give out for those acknowledgments of the behaviors that you want to see. Teaching those expectations. So when we're talking about our school-wide expectations, right, we typically talk about teaching them at minimum twice a year, right, as a whole school, the beginning of the year and mid-year. But you're also talking about your expectations every single day when you're in the classroom, when you're teaching your lesson plans. How do we then say, let's remember what those 3 to 5 expectations are and embed them and align them within creating that art project, within doing that science lab experiment? And why is that important to do that? Because we're aligning it and making those connections visually, verbally, and showing our students that this is in fact what you're doing and what we need you to show when you're sitting here and collaborating with your teachers and with your peers. Understanding as the educator and admin within the building those problem behavioral definitions. And why is that important? Because no matter what interventions you do, right, in your classroom setting, it's not going to get rid of all the behaviors that you're ever going to see. You're still going to see behaviors that may be going on in the classroom. And we need to make sure that they are clearly defined so everybody's on the same page. Oh, I'm sorry. And then those classroom procedures. So we're looking at now, within your lesson plan and within your class, those Tier 1 expectations, routines, acknowledgments, and then how are we consistent, right? So we have to have that consistency through there.
All right, so for today's presentation, we're going to be using a matrix from JTL as one of our intermediate schools. It's a 6th through 8th grade. We have about 900 students. This was information from last year. PA has a Future Ready PA Index that is a good tool so you can look up any district and find out certain information such as this. Yeah. Hold on. There you go. All right. So here's a matrix at JTL. As you see on the left-hand side, they use CAVS. This matrix was completely developed by students. The students came up with the words, they voted on them. And then in the classrooms, the teachers and the students met together and they came up with all the behavioral expectations of what would cooperative look like in the cafeteria, in the hallway. And then that was all put in a Google form And this is how this matrix was formed. So it wasn't by a team of adults, it was by kids. The students in that school took ownership, and they developed this as well as the teachers. And that starts with number one is buy-in. Because we all know with anything we do, we need buy-in. Because if we don't have buy-in, it's just a piece of paper, it's just a program on a document, and it's not being implemented because we have no buy-in. All right, here we provide a definition of SEL. And as you read it, I want you to see that it becomes clear that SEL is kind of like the heartbeat of your classroom. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see Cassell's 5 competencies of social, emotional, and academic learning. So first we have self-management. And self-management is when we're teaching others the ability to manage our emotions, manage our behavior. We have self-awareness. That is when we want to teach students how to be more aware and understanding of their emotions, their thoughts, their values. Next, we have relationship skills. That is when we want to teach our students how to maintain and establish healthy relationships within the classroom or outside of those classroom in those unstructured settings with their peers, with their staff members. You have responsible decision making, and that is when we're teaching students the ability to make choices, problem solving. Outside, you are going to see 3 circles, and these 3 circles are all the areas in where our learners are growing. They're learning in the classroom, through our curriculum and different instruction that we're delivering. They're learning through the school climate, our policies, our practices, and they're also learning within our family, community, and partnership. All right. So social emotional learning is research-based. There's a lot of research out there that shows how exactly it helps with student outcomes. It helps to improve in positive social behavior, reduce problem behavior, reduce emotional distress, and improve academics performance. And this is how aligning SEL with your PBIS program. So that is what I'm going to talk about right now, is how we took CAVs and we paired them up with one of the 5 competency areas. So when we looked at our matrix, we thought of, okay, what is responsible skills? And the box right there, you'll see that is what, relationship skills defines. What that comes up with. Then we looked at our matrix. And then what we did was said, okay, what word, what value lines up with relationship skills? And we came up as a team as a cooperative. The same thing for self-management. We looked at what self-management was, what is it defined by, and then we looked at our matrix and said, how does that align? What area does ambitious align with? And that we did self-management and ambitious. Self-awareness. So we paired up self-awareness with values, because again, it's all about aligning things. We have so many things out there, but everything is working separately, and it's saying, how can this not be one more thing added to my plate to do? It's saying, what do we actually have, and how are they all connected? And using the resources we have, so that way they strengthen each other instead of us using them separately. Social awareness, we match that up with a supportive, and then since we only had CAVs and there was 5 of them, they can overlap. They could have multiple meanings. You don't just have to take one and say, okay, I'm going to align up cooperative relationship skills. We thought cooperative, it relates to relationship skills and responsible decision making. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all. You can have your one behavioral expectation, and it could fit many of these. But the whole process is saying, how do the 2 come together? Because if I'm teaching a behavioral expectation, then I also want to figure out if I'm going to teach the kids cooperative, I'm going to make sure I'm hitting relationship skills. I'm going to make sure that I'm teaching them how to build relationship with diverse individuals and groups, communicate clearly. So it's taking those 2 and combining them together to say, how can I do this all together as one instead of separately? All right, Charlotte Danielson. Many of you in the room are probably familiar with Charlotte Danielson model. For those of you who are not, it came out about 1996. It's a framework for teaching, and it consists of 22 categories And then they are organized within 4 domains. So what I did was we looked at the Charlotte Danielson model and said, okay, how does this align and fit in with PBIS and SEL? So we found that the 2 domains, domain number 2 and domain number 3, if you look under those 2 domains, that is where we felt the behavioral expectations came in place. So 2B, establishing a culture for learning. That's teaching kids our behavioral expectations. Managing student behavior. Again, that's teaching those SEL lessons. That is working on our behavioral expectations, reteaching those lessons if we need to. Communicating with students, it's all about that delivery of instruction, right? So we can give them a piece of paper and we say, go do this, but it looks different when we say, hey, I want you to put your name on the paper and you're going to work quietly. And then when you're done, you're going to turn it in and then give them a choice of when you're done and you have nothing to do, you can read a book silently. And then the last one that we thought fit in was engaging in student learning.
So we really thought that this quote was fitting, where it says, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So when we think about our students, it's very similar to a couple of other quotes that I consistently use within when we talk about behavior, is that we want to look at and analyze the structure. So go back to that farming example that I gave, right? We're looking at the environment and we're looking at how are we able to make it the best environment for our students to grow and flourish academically and behaviorally, so that we can increase our instructional time and be able to get as much of our lessons as we can within the short period of time that we have, right, for our kids. One of the other things I like to just stop and say before we continue to go on is that this is not just taken on by one person, right? This is going to be a process maybe within your building or within a small pod, a group within your building, to be able to kind of sit back and say, what do we currently have, right? So based off of what we're talking about in our session today, what do we currently see within our building? What do we already have in place? And then how do we have them aligned? Like Jen was saying, we don't want everything to be siloed and parallel, right? We want it to blend together, so it's not that we're coming in. You know, another layer that we could have added on here too is trauma-informed, right? We just were focusing on certain things, you know, when we came in here. But, excuse me, how do we show that all of these work together, and how do we blend them in together so that it's not just one more thing that we're doing that doesn't connect? And then on top of it, how can then we get training for ourselves? What do we know? What do we need more information on, right? And how can we work together to collaborate and carry these ideas out? Because these are strategies that you're already doing in the classroom. Everything that we're talking about, it's nothing new, and it's not that you're not doing it, but we can help to be able to say, how can we do it maybe more seamlessly, or so that it doesn't feel like it's an extra thing added on. So we're going to talk about the lesson plans. And the reason why we're going to talk about the lesson plans is because this is, in the classroom setting, right, the core component of what the outcomes are going to be in your classroom. Right? What is the context of what you're going to deliver, because our students are going to maybe have to take an exam on it, do a project on something. Take what we're teaching them and then actually apply it within and generalize it to different settings. So you see here, this is a basic lesson plan. It is math. We're investigating place values and patterns. Some lesson plans are hand-created by educators. Others are generated by different programs, right? There's a variety of ways that we can get lesson plans. You're going to see standards. You're going to see objectives. You see higher order questions. You see procedures here, class activities, and different ways to differentiate, inclusive instruction, and then a closure, right? So key things that you're going to see throughout. I'm not going to read all the components of the lesson plan on here, right? But these are things. If I were to sit here and ask you, do you get a good understanding of the what and the how for the academics? I would think that I would see some nods maybe, potentially, right, to carry out this lesson plan. But what I want you to know briefly, just from what I described, do we see the what and the how for the behavioral expectations that we want to carry out for this lesson plan? And I'm automatically seeing heads shaking no. We know as we read this, oh, this is what I want it to look like. This is what I envision it. This is what I see it happening. I want small groups. Oh yeah, they're gonna go quietly into those four, that table of four seats. I hear laughing. 4 seats, and we're gonna do that within less than 5 minutes, and the activity is gonna go so smoothly. And it does when you're teaching it, right? When you're teaching those routines and procedures, it happens. But then even more so, how do we say what the classroom expectations are within the school-wide expectations? Are we talking about CABs? I'm gonna use our example. And are we stating that language when we're talking about place values and patterns? Do we do that? Self-reflection. This is just self-reflection. It's us to say, how can we show ourselves and our students that these expectations that we created together, or even if it was with, a group of adults through like a process, that we are carrying this through, and this is the core of our school, and this is why we're using them, and how much it has an impact on our academics and behavior. So, this is something that is very informally done, and Jen and I were talking about ways to be able to make it done a little bit more formally, but not add on so much extra work, right? So if you think about a lesson plan, and you have an extra table that's added on within your lesson plan, we can identify what's already in existence. School-wide expectation, the classroom expectations. Those are the rules that were given to us by the teacher that had the lesson plan. We didn't change anything on that. The stuff on top, those can change. This was just like an overarching one that would hit upon mostly everything that you see. We have whole group instruction, we have small group, we have independent and even testing. Now, if you take that lesson plan, now just for cooperative, what does that look like for each setting? If I were to put this up here, you're going to see that my expectations for cooperative look vastly different between whole group and testing. However, you have access to the handouts too, just letting you know that all of this is within your handouts as well, just so that, in case you are looking and asking. I'm not sure how they're uploaded, but we can answer that question later. So you can see that we're being very specific, and we're extracting language from the lesson plan, and we're verbalizing that to our students. So it's coming out of my head and my paper as the educator, and I'm translating that to the students so that they know what I want to see, what I want to hear. And when I say hear, not that I'm asking them to script something, but a rough gist, right, of kind of like what I'm expecting them to share out, but within their own thought process, right? And how I want them to cooperate and work with those relationship skills with their peers and with myself as the adult in the classroom. And then we took that, and then we said, okay, now what does that look like for ambitious? And we have that out. So if we're in whole group, we're not gonna worry about small group, independent, and testing, right? We're just gonna look at CABs, and we're gonna look at CABs for whole group, and that's what we're gonna share during that time. That may be a 15-minute, 20-minute instructional time. Now we're going to switch, say for a half hour to small group. Now we're gonna go through our expectations for small group with CABs. This shouldn't take long to communicate. It should be quick with our kids, right? It's just informing. Maybe sometimes we do like a bullet of a few things we want them to think about, on there, just as a visual, for them, or a reminder. But we're really going back to that lesson plan, and we're adding on and we're elaborating a little bit more so that we don't have to maybe do as much correcting with the behavioral thoughts that we want. Think of how many times you stop and remind our kids for the behavioral one. If we say it very clear up front, we should be able to increase then our instructional time later on. If it becomes innate and part of what we do every day, they're going to get used to that too and remind it, but we're basing it back on the school-wide expectation. So they're hearing it even more. So when they get that ticket, whether it's virtual or, paper and tangible, they know why, and we'll get to, as you're providing that with the behavior-specific praise, they're knowing why it's ambitious. So you will see that in those handouts for value and for supportive to finish up the caps. The other part here that I'm going to say is another lesson plan. This is art. So I think and this is just from personal experience here when I've worked with teams, school-wide expectations are not just for reading and math and science, and social studies. We see it in art and music and gym. There's so many ways you can carry out and show that your school-wide expectations can be embedded across your school in all different academic settings. And so basically with this lesson plan here, that same what and how question that I posed to you before is the same thing. We see from here that we can get that outcome academically, like that picture from that lesson plan. The lesson plan covers that. We can do that. But the in-between of how to get there with what we expect to see behaviorally is missing with it written down. So again, you're going to see things on here, cooperative. So in independent, maybe I went through and I would be the kid that would have like 5 different crumbled up papers because the drawing, whatever. But my teacher is telling me, you know what, if you don't want them, keep them at your desk and dispose of them at the end of class so that we don't have so many people up and walking around. Versus not saying that and then maybe having disruption where then I'm interrupting Jen's thought process. So we're trying to be mindful. So saying something as simple as that up front is like, oh, okay, she said that already. Or he said that already. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to throw it out right now. These are the little things that we're talking about here. And again, I'm just going to point out like simple things here and not go through, like each one. But we're also looking at in the whole group, right? We're showing examples. I can write on the board, or we're using a smart board. We're looking at just these components, color pencil techniques, various designs and symbols. That's what my mind should be focused on. That's clearly written out in the lesson plan, but maybe I didn't say that, and now the kids are talking about all these different things that are kind of bringing us off topic. So this helps hone us in more, and we're focused in our discussion.
I just want to chime in real quick. So all classrooms have classroom rules, right? So we have our behavioral expectations, and then every single classroom has classroom rules, and guess what? Some of them aren't all the same, right? So what's for a 1st grade classroom might not be age appropriate for a 6th grade classroom or a 4th grade classroom. So then it's taking your classroom rules that you have and operationally defining them and saying, okay, what does that look like? And then you're going to take your matrix, and then you take your behavioral expectations and you align those with your classroom rules. Because then you're showing kids that if I want you to be cooperative, this is what it's like to be cooperative inside my classroom. Yeah, we have the big matrix, but I have, as a teacher, I have my own classroom rules. And then it's teaching them how it's aligned. So it's not, well, in this area, these rules have to be followed. And then I go to a different setting, but they're not the same rules, so I have to completely adjust and figure out what that teacher's rules want to be. That's a lot. That's a lot for kids to handle, especially when they have 9 different teachers. You think at the secondary level, they don't have 4 teachers all day. They have 9 different classes they're going to. So that's 9 different instructional environments that they have to know what is the expectation of me in all of those classrooms, as well as the cafeteria and the hallway. So it's taking everything and fitting it together and showing them how everything is connected. So it's taking your classroom expectations in your classroom and saying, okay, how can I tie this in with my behavioral expectations And then they're already aligned with your SEL. So it's taking all three of them, instead of it being separate, it's mashing them together to seeing how they fit together. All right, specific content praise. A lot of us in here probably have heard praise before, right? I don't think, we don't have time, do we?
Probably not.
We probably don't have time for this. We're just going to skip this real quick. All right, so a lot of us in here, we've probably heard praise before, right? Verbal praise, people love to be positively reinforced, right? We all like to know when we're doing something right. This is something that is free. It's super easy to do. However, sometimes the easiest things to do are the ones that we don't do as often. A lot of times I have been in numerous settings where I've sat and I haven't heard one positive praise at all in a 45-minute or an hour and a half. Not even one positive thing. And then it got me thinking, well, how does kids' viewpoint? So I've talked to various kids all the time, even my own kids. And I'll go, what was something, did one adult say something nice to you today? Even if it was a peer. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, did anybody come up to you and just say one nice thing, like, thank you for coming to school, it's so nice to see you. Hey, you're in dress code today, that's awesome. Or, you know what, you arrived to class on time. Thank you so much for arriving to class on time. No. And you think of it, we're all social beings, right? We want to hear something positive throughout our day. So that's something I've started to notice is verbal praise, it's free. It's free and it's easy, but it's something that we don't do as often. So then I started collecting data on my own behavior of saying, well, how much do I praise people? So I have a little golf clicker. So I'd go around and I would make sure if my goal was to say 10 positive things to someone a day, I would click my golf clicker just to make sure that was keeping me accountable. And not even on the students, but also to staff. Think about all the colleagues. We work with amazing colleagues. And it's awesome to point out things that they're doing awesome, right? Because the more that you point out that something's doing something, right, they're going to keep doing it. And that's when we get into contingent specific praise. It's not just saying, great job. Because a lot of times, my kids will come home like, Mom, I got a rise ticket. I'm like, that's awesome. What'd you get it for? I have no idea. Okay, then we have a problem because they're getting these points and they know they can cash them in for rewards, but they have no idea how they're getting them. And then I talk to students passing the hallway and they'll come up to me and tell me something. I'm like, awesome, you got an A, a great job on your paper. That's awesome. Do you know why? They're like, I have no idea. So it's important when we're giving that praise, we need to be specific because the more specific we are, that person is more inclined to do that expected behavior. So again, you have a kid who is constantly late, tardy to your class, and they know detention, whatever, ISS, that's all right, that's a vacation. I don't want to be in class anyways. But if you're going to praise them, and they're actually thinking, I'm getting that positive attention, they're more inclined to show up every day because they notice that you care. And that's the whole thing about building relationships. All right. Again, here are something, I'm not going to read them, but praise is it's research-based. And like I said, it's free. It's something that we can do. It's very easy to do. It's just getting the habit. It's like a habit of things, right? So if I want to work out on my bike consistently, I know I have to do it for 2 weeks straight in order to become a habit, right? Otherwise, like, not today. Maybe I'll watch some Netflix today, or I don't have time. So it's getting in the habit of constantly making sure, did I verbally praise somebody today? And that's what my outlook now is. I think of it more conscious as, okay, after I got a conversation with that one staff member, did I say something positive about that? Like, did I say, hey, you know what? I love the tier 1 intervention that you used with Johnny. He was able to raise his hand. Great job. Are we pointing out those things that people are doing right? Because a lot of times we look at our discipline and we're like, ugh, it's so easy to think of all the negative things, but why is it so hard to think of all the great positive things that we're doing and recognize people for doing the right thing? And this is just research about how praise is extremely beneficial to use because it can increase on-task behavior, increases student attention, compliant, especially if we have a lot of students who are non-compliant and exhibit non-compliant behaviors. This is great to increase their compliant behaviors because you're pointing out the expected behavior that you want them to do. Because a lot of times we assume, right? Well, I assume it's going to give you this, and you're just going to sit there and you're going to do your work. But we can't assume. They're kids. We have to teach them those expected behaviors. And then when we're doing something right, recognize them. We all like to be recognized for things that we're doing good. All right. Here are just some steps, research-based, of how to give praise. Usually state the person's name. And then you give that specific praise statement. So if I say, Raquel, you know what? You did an awesome job at presenting slide 3. That was great. I loved it. And then you describe the specific behavior. So I'm saying her name, but I'm telling her what was it that I liked. I was just like, yo, high five, great job. And I'm passing through. And then here are some examples of some specific behavioral praises, and then we have non-examples. For sake of time, I shouldn't do those. All right, so usually rule of thumb is, when do you acknowledge people? As often as you can. Usually it's 4-to-1 or 6-to-1 ratio, so that's positive reinforcement versus a corrective response. Again, I'm going to stress you do this because you want to see that repeated behavior. If you are wanting to see, like I said, you have a student who, they bring a Chromebook charger, their Chromebook, but it's not charged. Well, in the days they charge their Chromebook and they have it at school, you praise them for bringing a Chromebook that's charged and that they can use. Because the more that they're praised for the good things they're doing, the more likely they're going to keep continuing to do it. Because they realize somebody cares about them. Somebody notices me. Somebody's my champion, right? We all want to be like here for that kid. It's pointing out things now that they're doing right.
And then the last component that we really wanted to touch upon today, and again, what Jen just spoke about and what I'm going to speak about here are things that you're already doing and that you have within your classroom setting, but we wanted to show how, if you're embedding those expectations and the SEL within your lesson plans, reminding that in order to reinforce that, and then in order to respond to maybe what we're not seeing, like what we want to see, this is how we do it, and it's packaged together within that lesson plan, setting within the classroom. So here you see that this is a continuum of strategies to respond to inappropriate behavior, starting from planned ignoring as the most simplistic, to going into more direct and then intensive responses in terms of like having that conference with the student. So if there are any questions, as I'm continuing to talk about things, about how is that defined, these next 2 slides have the definitions, for those. So one of the things, as I'm reading, if you want to look at that, is to consider, is this included in your school's discipline flow chart? Can you have these options written down so that it's consistent for all classrooms so that they can see what the options are? And then maybe provide some sort of PD or training to give an overview about what do these mean? How would you carry this out? What does it look like? In what situations, you're not going to be able to cover all because every situation is different, but in what situations can I use this? Can we role play it out? Or can 2 people maybe role play it out? Because I know sometimes role playing is not the most comfortable thing to do, but just to see what my options are and what is in my toolbox to be able to respond to those behaviors, even with enhancing my tier 1 level of support within the classroom. So this could be something else that can be added on to that lesson plan, and this can be very consistent for a classroom teacher. So on the one side, you see behavior-specific praise, and it's kind of indicating that goal. So for myself as a teacher, if I had the luxury of having a colleague coming in my class to be able to do some observations and give me a really good baseline, Jen comes in, she does an observation for me, and she tells me that, my baseline is on average about like 2 praise statements, maybe for the whole class. And then for certain kids, it might be 0 or it might be 3 or 5. I can kind of know where my starting point is, and then I can kind of create a baseline for myself so I can increase that over time, right? And make that connection to embedding my school-wide expectations within my lesson plan. Additionally, for responding to minor problem behavior, you're going to see those examples that I just showed you. Now this is in a step. And the reason why we're presenting it this way is because it gives you like a simple hierarchy on how to respond to problem behaviors. So you're able to start off with step 1 first, right? And keep that consistency within the class across all students. So I know that if I'm not seeing what I want to see in my classroom during a certain period of time, I'm going to provide a rule reminder. And that can be asking a different student to read the rule, having the entire class recite the rule, or having the teacher state and review the rule that was typically broken. We do that. If I'm still seeing that problem behavior occurring, then I might have a nonverbal reminder, like a picture. And you see that it increases over time, where the last one is there might need to be a safe space for de-escalation. Again, not every situation is going to conform within this, but it helps me to be consistent as an educator with behaviors that I may see, and then it also helps my kids know, okay, well, without even realizing, they're gonna know, oh, she's at step 3 already. Like, she gave us that verbal reminder, this is the next one, because I'm clear and open with them about that. So again, the reason why we package elaborating more on the behavior-specific praise and these, which again are things that we know you know and that you're doing, with the behavioral expectations in the class, in the lesson plan setting, is because without that reinforcement and without the responding, that other part's not going to be effective. So we need to show that it needs to be collaborative and go together. So last but not least, our last slide, we like to leave this quote with you. And I am going to read this one because I feel like this is a very impactful and powerful one. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, do we teach or do we punish? And we can't always finish that last sentence as automatically as we can with the previous ones. And again, that is the context of our session today in terms of just being very clear and explicit with our expectations and embedding them. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I don't think so. I think the most important thing is, like I said, we have all these awesome things and tools and resources. It's now seeing how they're intertwined and working together and not separately. And that way it's coming as one. So the kids aren't, these are my classroom, these are my PBIS, these are SEL. It's teaching how they're all connected to each other to help them.
So thank you for your time today. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We'll be more than happy.
Thank you.